Okay, let's watch museums. Fine, Sky, thank you for the 5 gifted subs.
Our main story tonight concerns antiquities. Basically, relics from bygone times that can tell us stories about people from the past. Like your nana, but less overtly racist. Specifically, our story concerns what happens when those relics go missing. And I'll start by giving you just one example.
I think it's wonderful that a British man is explaining this, okay?
If you go to Greece, you might go to the Acropolis Museum, and while you're marvelling at sculptures that are over 2 millennia old, you might notice some odd details, like this sculpture, which appears to have a white foot, or this one, where someone's whole upper half seems to be suddenly and overwhelmingly white. It's what's known in the art world as Season 2 of The Wire. Well, there is an explanation for where those missing pieces are, and as a British person, I'm a little bit implicated.
So the darker stone is the original, whereas this white plaster, that represents what's in the British Museum?
Yes, exactly.
And here it is, in the British Museum. The missing marble head and chest floating in a display space.
Yep, we took it. Honestly,
It's so weird that they won't give it back. It is weird. It is weird. It's like everybody knows you stole it. I just don't get it. Like, I don't understand. Like, it's not like it fucking materialized, you know? What the fuck? It's so strange. And many countries, as I'm sure John Oliver is going to tell you, have made attempts to recover these stolen artifacts. Okay? It's not like they're like, oh, I wonder where it is. You know what I mean? I wonder where it went. Like, we know where it went. It's there. You have it. Give it back, motherfucker. And they're like, nah.
Honestly, if you're ever looking for a missing artifact, 9 times out of 10, it's in the British Museum. It's the world's largest lost and found, both
It's
lost
true.
and found in the heaviest possible quotation marks there. Specifically, those marbles, known in England as the Elgin marbles, were taken by Lord Elgin, a 19th century British lord who hacked them off the Parthenon. It's something that the Greeks are understandably furious about because they weren't lost, they were taken, which is clearly worse. It's like being unable to find the last puzzle piece and learning that you didn't actually misplace it. A British earl snuck into your house, stole it, and then sold it to a museum over 1,000 miles away. Greece has been demanding the return of the Elgin marbles for decades now, but the response from some of the British Museum's defenders has been, even by British standards, unbelievably patronising.
One can't even think about returning the Elgin marbles to Athens until the Greeks start caring for what they already have. I'm sure they'd take great care of the Parthenon sculptures if they were returned. But
Bro, that is so fucked up, dude. That's so fucked up!
if you knew a woman was abusing her child, you wouldn't let her adopt another. And that's what the Greeks are asking for.
What? That is not a great comparison, especially because it admits the fact that the woman's child in this example was basically kidnapped. So it's less a woman asking to adopt another child than it is her demanding the return of her first one. And look, the Parthenon marble...
By the way, ironic because he's talking about Greeks, which is definitely not the worst victim of the British Museum. Yes, you are correct. Annoyed by the West. Ironic username. I guess it's like better for a Western audience to comprehend it though, because like Western audiences are oftentimes like not going to think of, I don't know, any number of African nations or the third world in general as like human beings that have autonomy and their own interests in recovering stolen artifacts, which is why they're talking about, Greece instead.
Should absolutely be returned to Greece. Even that woman you just saw now says that she thinks they should go back. But those marbles are just the tip of the iceberg here. The fact is, antiquities, largely from the global south, which includes Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the Mideast, have been taken and enshrined in European and American museums on a much larger scale than you may realise. In 2018, a report commissioned by the French president found that over 90% of all Africa's cultural heritage is held outside Africa by major museums. But as the voices arguing for antiquities to be returned are getting louder, others are resisting any change. In 2010, when asked whether the UK would ever return the Kohinoor diamond to India, Prime Minister David Cameron refused, saying, if you say yes to one, you suddenly find the British Museum would be empty.
What? Oh, damn, dude. That's crazy. It's our colonial plunder, mate. You understand me? It's our colonial plunder. It's ours. It's a slippery slope, then.
Which is incredibly frustrating, and it's frankly no wonder that some are now taking matters into their own hands.
In June, a Congolese activist removed a 19th century Chadian funeral pole from the Quai Branly Museum in Paris as part of a protest campaign against plundering during the colonial era.
Yeah, that happened. And obviously, that man was unaware of the museum's very clear policy, no stealing African antiquities, starting now. So given just how many antiquities in some of the world's most prestigious museums are essentially stolen goods, tonight, let's talk about museums. And this is going to be a larger story than normal, and we're going to do it in two main parts. First,
to be fair, they stole a lot of things from Turkey too. Yeah, I know. To be fair, it is British culture. Okay? I have to mention this. I'm not making a mockery, but it is British culture to plunder from the rest of the world and bring back the crown jewels. All right? This is British culture. You must do it. You must understand. Asking for take-backsies after we've stolen is like spitting on the face of the Queen. Unacceptable.
First, concerning how antiquities ended up in museums in the past, and then about the thriving modern market that keeps them supplied with objects to this very day. And look, we don't have time to recap the entire history of colonialism and the plunder of antiquities. There are so many stolen artifacts that we could talk about tonight, from the treasures of Tipu Sultan to the Zodiac of Dendera. But in order to say a lot in a little, let's stay with the British Museum. In its own promotional materials, it makes a big feature of just...
To be fair, they take more than just artifacts. Sometimes they take countries or pieces of countries when they can't take the whole country. You know? So there is that. People as well. And you know, they haven't done a really good job of dealing with the historical restitution for stealing whole countries. I mean, whole peoples. But you know, it's not like they want to give back the country either.
Just how important and influential its founding was.
In January 1759, the British Museum opened its doors, the first national public museum of the world. Initially, the objects were based on the founding collection of Sir Hans Sloane. And this is Hans Sloane, scholar, entrepreneur, physician, who was connected with the best minds of his time. In fact, our collection has always been about connecting people.
Okay, first, I'm going to say what we're all thinking. That guy has definitely Googled, could night at the museum actually happen? Not because he's scared of a big bony dinosaur chasing him, but because when no one is around, he definitely fucks the art, and he definitely doesn't want any of it talking. But that notion of museums as a place for people to connect with our shared history and with cultures all over the world clearly isn't fundamentally bad. But it's also not wholly representative of the actual history of how many museums came to be. For instance, Hans Sloane, who on his best day looked like that, had some interesting connections of his own, specifically the fact that he was married to an heiress to sugar plantations in Jamaica.
You know, again, we're going back to British culture, okay? It's like you're spitting on the face of everything and anything that is to be British. To be fair. What's next? Are you going to now make a mention of pedophilia, noncery, incest? Because that's really fucked up. Now you are hitting the trifecta, okay? Colonialism, slavery, theft, and noncery. You are being Britophobic. Just say it. Just outwardly come out and say, you have, John Oliver, internalized Britophobia.
slavery and colonialism.
Chat, what is noncery? Pedophiles.
With the same being true of many of its most prized holdings. Take the Benin bronzes. It's a term that refers to a huge range of objects produced in the Kingdom of Benin, which is currently part of modern-day Nigeria. Now, the Benin bronzes were looted from the palace of the King of Benin, or the Oba, in 1897 after the British military invaded and violently toppled him. That mission was vindictive and it was destructive, but it was also extremely targeted.
The British soldiers, armed with machine guns, conquered the city and burned it to the ground, but not before carefully taking thousands of artifacts. They piled them up neatly, photographed them, and even labeled them loot. This photo, taken at the Benin Palace after the raid, shows soldiers with the dismantled plaques that were brought to the British Museum and sold all over the world.
Okay, first, that's obviously awful, but second, it is pretty remarkable that a British soldier went to the trouble of carefully labelling each of those photos, and the captions he used were loot and more loot. At the very least, he could have chosen something more descriptive, like, I don't know, Dan, Terry and I after doing cultural genocide. But the looting of the Benin bronzes wasn't just a physical loss, it was a cultural and historical one. Take...
Homie in the chat said Benin Empire was a slavery empire. Oh shit, dude. Good thing the British did it then. Like, even in that circumstance, like, you're okay. What did the British Empire do? Like, they're still worse overall. You know what I mean? It's not like they did that and this. Why are you making it seem like they were based like abolitionists or something? What the fuck? Yeah, they did that John Brown style. When they stole all the artifacts, they were doing it in a John Brown kind of way. Yeah, I was shitting on Dream earlier, but in an anti-racist way. You know what I mean? I was doing it to be anti-racist. That's how it works.
These plaques, they are not just pieces of art. They're something much more important, as this member of the Benin royal family explained.
Those things are like our own diaries. Whatever was significant, the Oba would tell the guild of bronze casters to cast it in bronze, to keep a record. So taking them away was like yanking off pages of our history.
Right. For that kingdom, these were their memories made physical. And these plaques were laid out in a very specific order, which was then lost when the British tore them from the palace walls, meaning that the British, in effect, stole and scrambled a nation's memories. A crime so fucked up, even Black Mirror hasn't thought of it yet. The bronzes are currently scattered among 161 museums and institutions around the world, with only 9 such institutions located in Nigeria. And understandably, there have been calls for the return of the bronzes for decades now, and a handful of museums have complied. But the British Museum, which holds more bronzes than anyone, has repeatedly refused, pointing to the British Museum Act of 1963, which explicitly forbids it from giving an item in its collection away, with very limited exceptions. And the thing is, that law does exist, but laws can also be changed if you want to. And the more you hear British officials talk, the clearer it becomes that that is not what they want at all.
Well, I think that they properly reside in the British Museum. The collections of our great national institutions have been developed over many, many centuries, in many times in questionable circumstances. I think the question now is about what we do with these. I love the Benin bronzes. I've seen them many times throughout my life.
That's nice.
And I think them being in the British Museum, which is a world repository of heritage, allows people to see it.
Yeah, that...
In England. Allows people to see it in Britain.
Offensively English man loves the Benin bronzes. And while I'm so glad that Oliver James Dowden, MP for Hertsmere, has seen them many times throughout his life, the fact is not everyone gets to do that, as this Nigerian artist and art historian will attest.
1995, in London. That was my first time of seeing an original ancient Benin artwork. Was, yes, at the British Museum to see for the first time these objects. It was a mixture of pride in the achievement of these ancient artists and anger mixed with a sense of loss. Most Nigerians will never see them.
Exactly. The generations of British children who've grown up loving the Benin bronzes come at the expense of generations of Nigerians who haven't. And again, this is just one example of so many. And whenever the question of returning stolen objects comes up, there are usually a few stock responses which are worth quickly addressing. The first is basically that these were acquired in a different time, and you can't judge the present by the standards of the past. When France was recently roiled by a debate over whether to return African art, this catastrophically French art historian basically made that exact case.
These artifacts, who do they belong to? They belong to the museums where they are now, because there are laws, you know. And if even for the...
I love going to the French. It's like going to the French to ask them their perspective on this is pretty funny because it's like, well, they do the same shit. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, yeah, let's ask the Germans afterwards, okay? I think we should just go through all of the countries that did exactly the same thing.
the artifacts which were looted in the 19th century. In the 19th century, the war, there was laws, and the looting of war was legal. Maybe it's not moral, but it's legal. And if you want to come back on this, why don't you come back 19th century, 17th century, 16th century? You cannot stop. You don't know where to stop.
OK, so how do I explain this so that man will understand? Yes, there may not have been laws explicitly making looting illegal, but the idea that gives you carte blanche is, how you say, hors shit. And setting aside that Didier Reichner, the looting apologist art historian, seems less like a real person and more like a character in Tintin, How We Saved the Egyptians from Themselves, the fact is, looting wasn't just an acceptable, unavoidable byproduct of war under the law. It was sometimes baked into the plan from the outset. In fact, during one notorious British raid in northern Ethiopia in 1868, the army even brought along an expert from the British Museum to bid for some of the choicest items. And importantly, people knew the practice was wrong even back then. After that raid on Ethiopia, the British Prime Minister said he deeply lamented, for the sake of the country and for the sake of all concerned, that these articles were thought fit to be brought away by a British army, and urged that they be held only until they could be restored. And he was saying that in 1868? We didn't even know how to fix a UTI without leeches back then. But we knew that raiding other countries for their shit was deeply lamentable, which is British for super fucked up.
True.
Now, the second common argument is that objects are actually safer under the care of Western institutions than they would be in their home country. Here is that case being made by an art dealer regarding pre-Columbian art from Peru.
According to the law, which I like to think of as Solomon's law, the one who loves the baby best gets the baby. The one who will pay the most for the baby gets the baby. If Peru cannot properly take care of its national treasures, the rest of the world will take care of it for the Peruvians, as it should be.
That man seems great. But you know what? He is right. It's exactly as King Solomon famously declared. The real mother is whoever agrees to offer $200,000 over the asking price, all cash, inspection waived. But that argument, you can't be trusted with your own property, you'll just damage it, is hard to land even before you learn that the caretaking record of some museums is mixed at best. Remember that woman insisting that the Greeks couldn't possibly take care of the Parthenon marbles? Here is a fun fact. multiple leaks have been reported in the British Museum's Greek galleries, and in the 1930s, in what museum officials later admitted was a heavy-handed attempt to clean the sculptures, they actively damaged them by scrubbing them with wire brushes and a harsh cleaning agent. And look, even under Solomon's law, whoever loves the baby gets the baby, but if you scrub the baby with wire brushes, we take the fucking baby away. And the final argument that you hear is that these museums are an open repository of the world's treasures and can actually increase the number of people who can enjoy them. But you've already seen someone point out that is only true if you can get to the museum in question. And also, it's worth noting that most display only a tiny fraction of their collections. The British Museum, for instance, has a collection of 8 million objects, although only around 80,000 of them, just 1%, are on public display at any one time. And it can be pretty galling for people to find that their heritage, which is often part of a vibrant present-day culture, is sitting in storage in the British Museum's underground loot prison. Here in the US, we've stashed away many Native American artifacts. And just watch as members of the Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho tribes are allowed to visit artifacts in storage at Chicago's Field Museum.
So just beyond here is the storeroom where we'll be looking at some of the artifacts.
When I think about objects that belong to tribal members that are just sitting there in the dark, I felt angry and I felt sad.
You just walk in and there's just like rows and rows.
I mean, that's like a flex at that point, right? I mean, that's just like, that's insult to injury. Like, obviously, displaying it and flexing it is horrible, wrong, give it back. But then if they hide it, it's like, are you fucking joking? Like, you're not even looking at it. It's like, maybe one day, dude. You literally have stolen antiques too? What? Ancient Greek bust, ancient Mexican llama statue, Mayan crystal skull, 20,000-year-old stone statue. Wait, what the fuck is that? Oh, that's a jacked teddy bear. Mexican llama, motherfucker. Llamas are not Mexican. Guys, it's a joke. They're joking. That's why they're saying it. I give it back, but it looks too good behind me. Especially the Mexican llama. The Mexican llama.
Rows and rows of all these objects. They've been boxed away since they were collected. Nobody can see them, touch them, be around them.
That is devastating. And it gets a lot harder to pretend that these objects are fulfilling a mission of educating and connecting people when they're in a basement in a box labelled with a fucking Sharpie. And at this point, you may well be thinking, well,